Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking to Diane Boden. She is the host of the Minimalist Moms podcast, and she's the author of Minimalist Moms Living and Parenting with Simplicity. Diane lives in Ohio with her husband and three kids. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So, Diane, let's start with the very basics. Tell us how you define minimalism.
Minimalism. So I do think it looks different for everyone. I always say that when I'm talking to whomever. I think that I've adapted more of a life of intention as opposed of every wall is sparse. I don't own anything. I have three kids. So it's going to look a little bit different than maybe a single guy living on his own. But I think for me, minimalism is really a tool to simplify my life. And it has worked so far for 12 years.
And is minimalism, are we born to minimalism? Can we learn minimalism? Do you feel like you were a natural minimalist, or is it something that you really had to think about and adapt to?
No, it was definitely something that I adapted to. So I'm sorry for anyone that's ever heard this story before, but I will tell it because it was a profound moment for me. My husband and I were in our early 20s and we were searching for something in my parents' basement. And he looked at me and said, "Look at these things that are now in boxes that were once your dad's hard earned working hours." And it really struck me because I had been working full time since I was out of high school. I did the school and working full time thing, but I had nothing to show for it. And after we got married, I was a little bit better with my money, but I just felt like I was spending frivolously. And so I guess there was a little bit of frugality that came to mind there. But I kind of just thought, I don't want things in boxes one day. I'd rather have experiences in my mind that will last forever versus these things that are maybe just trendy or fun for a moment, and then they just end up in a box. So we never really had a conversation there about, oh, we're going to start pursuing minimalism. It was just a change of where I wanted to put our focus or where I wanted to put my focus at least. And he was already, I don't know. I don't know if men, I haven't discovered if I think men are more minimalist than women, but I just felt like it was something we were unified on. Let's spend money on our experiences, not things. Let's work toward just a life of intention together. So, I mean, the things were actually easier to whittle away than I'm learning my schedule and my mind.
Mm.
Now that I've gotten rid of the things, I have the space and wherewithal to start decluttering my mind. And that I'm finding to be a lot more difficult because you have to be, it seems, a lot more intentional. And some things seem to be out of my control, whereas my home seemed to be more in my control. I can control the things that are coming in, but I can't control other people. So sometimes I feel like minimalism or even just a life of simplicity and intention can be more difficult once you really start to dig in.
And you really hit the nail on the head before when you said maybe it's easier for non-parents. I mean, of course it's easier for non-parents, right? There's just so much less stuff
Yeah.
accumulating in your front hall when you're a single person living alone or you're a couple without kids or whatever. It's when they like hit first grade and the permission slips start coming home and the birthday party favors sit on the chair in the front hall and the 18 pairs of shoes. That's when it really starts to accumulate, right? And that seems to
Mhm.
me like that's the first part is sort of acceptance. Like, yeah, you are gonna have too much stuff in your house once you have kids.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and you can't again, you can control yourself. So I think sometimes a lot of women I talk to, they're like, "Well, I can't even get my husband on board with living this way." And it's like, "Well, just do the best that you can with your closet, with your spaces in the household, with the areas that are more communal. Have those conversations about what those spaces look like, even with your kids. Bring your kids into those spaces. Give your husband a place where he can be a little bit more chaotic. My husband has his workshop, and that's where he can live how he wants. But in the communal areas, it's like we're all trying to exist together here. So let's trying to put in to practice the best systems that work for all of us. And sometimes that's not no shade to the home edit, but sometimes that doesn't look like your HGTV home edit aesthetic. It might just be what's best functioning for you. So, but yeah, I think with the kids, you can't control them. You can't control your husband, but you can control you and what you're bringing in. So once you shift your mindset to that, it's given me a lot of freedom.
Mm. I think also Amy was kind of starting to touch on it, and I hadn't thought of it that way. I think with kids, there's a lot of passive stuff that kind of comes in the house. It's
Mhm.
6 bicycles and there were all 3 kids, like 5 bicycles, 5 Halloween costumes every year, 5 sets of Christmas presents from all the different or whatever, that
Can
there's
I
just stuff
can I
that kind of
punch in with
flows.
the thing that really came to a head for me this week was the remote control cars. I was talking about this
Mm.
with my sister who has 4 boys. The remote control cars and then the remotes that you can't tell which car they go with, and they don't
Mhm.
really ever work so well after the day your kid receives this thing. So she has like 8 cars and 8 remotes that don't seem to work together. And yet, like, they were birthday presents, so she's not supposed to get rid of them, or is she? Like the kids stuff is just a particularly kind of frustrating.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I was just cleaning out my car and I found this remote control spider and the remote control to it, and it doesn't work anymore, and they got it not too long ago. And I have a little space, a little limbo, as I call it, of a box that those things that aren't typically played with or maybe forgotten about, they go into that box. And then after I set a specific deadline, it's usually after about a month. If they're not asked for, I just get rid of them. For my
Mm.
9-year-old, I kind of bring her on board a little bit more. But I think you're constantly assessing what needs to stay and what needs to go. And again, as your kids grow older, bring them in on that conversation. I think I don't ever want this type of lifestyle to backfire on me. Um, but it is something that I'm constantly going through. Even the clothes, every time I do a load of laundry, I just kind of assess, okay, what do I have? And then I have a box right there of donations. So I always say it sounds so overthought. Like I must be some control freak type A person. I don't think that I am. I think it's just become such a habit in my life that again, this minimalism idea is a tool that helps me have more freedom to where I'm not feeling the overwhelm necessarily of my things.
And I think there's the passive version, right? Stuff that's just like the barfing backpacks that are like, here's 86, art projects and pieces of paper that maybe, especially as your kids get older, like, will they at some point need these for the midterm or the final? Like, I get nervous
Mhm.
about throwing out kids' schoolwork. And there's that kind of river flow that comes in. And then
Mhm.
I know for my family, there's also the active, which is more the sort of, "Oh, let's just get that from Amazon," like, everything we think of can be
Yeah.
delivered to our door, or even just being grocery shopping and like, "Oh, I like that," and kind of throwing away half-eaten boxes of cereal that people forgot about. And I think for us, that is where we made a pact in January. I mean, our kind of New Year's resolution,
Mhm.
like, let's all have a meeting, or my husband and I have to say out loud to each other if we're gonna order something off of Amazon because we just tend, I think, to be like, "You need what? Post-its?" I'm like, "We have 5,000 Post-its." The other day, we were cleaning out the kitchen, and we have 3, 3-gallon jugs of soy sauce. Like, soy sauce is not something you use by the gallon. Luckily, I don't think it goes bad quickly either, but, like, why do we have 3 jugs of soy sauce? Because Amazon will bring it to our door when we
Mhm.
think we're out of it.
And
And and I think that, does that track for you? Like, there's an easier place to stop the incoming.
yeah, I mean, I think you do have to sit down, especially with your spouse or your partner, and say, what does it look like? Where do we want to spend our money? Where do we want to be intentional? If we need to set up those conversations, my husband and I don't talk about our Amazon purchases, but I think again, we're into these habits where we're
Right?
just
You
really
probably don't have as much of a problem as we do.
well, no, but even still going through my list, sometimes I'm like, why did I think that I needed that? And it is
Mm.
scary. It is an honest slap in the face when you scroll back through your Amazon and see what you've spent your money and how it adds up. That is a really scary thing. Uh, I don't know. I think taking an assessment and like maybe calculating the price of the things that you wasted your money on can just help it bring it to the prefrontal cortex to get it into that space
Mhm.
of rationality versus just like your lizard brain, the back of your brain,
Right.
like operating because it feels good and it's pleasurable in the moment. And it's a fleeting emotion that's being filled by something that you actually don't need. You actually needed rest or food or connection, and I think especially as moms, we get into those habits of just mindlessly scrolling and buying. And it's like, we never really needed that. That was just to fill a void of something else that we didn't get.
We're talking to Diane Boden. She is the host of the Minimalist Moms podcast, and we'll be right back. Diane, I have a big question for you about minimalism.
Okay.
I was reading recently Gretchen Rubin's Outer Order, Inner Calm,
Oh, yeah.
and I love Gretchen's work. And I'm definitely I'm definitely that kind of person. Like everything needs to be neat because then I feel relaxed. But then I really stopped and thought about it. Like she presents that as like the two of those just go together, right? The more neat your house is, the more calm you'll feel. Like, well, that's true for me. Is that necessarily true for everybody? Do people have different set points from minimalism?
Mm.
And does forcing your like perfect order on somebody else actually become stressful sometimes for that person? Like is less stuff better for everybody?
I don't think anyone wants to live or desires to live in a state of chaos. And I think that someone said to me recently, it's like when I go to a hotel room and it's all
Mm.
organized, I just feel kind of good in there. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a perfect example. But I think about the two places where you kind of start and end your day. So one is the bathroom. When you start and end your day, you're usually in the bathroom. And so I try to keep that area as minimal as possible because it just kind of sets that intention again for the day, but also the entryway of your home. When you're leaving and you're like, oh no, I have this entire space that I have to come home and address. It's just out of control. And most often than not, I do think it's an outward representation of maybe some things going on in your life that you haven't addressed. And again, with 3 kids, it's not always perfect, but I think the fact that I can get in there and quickly tidy, that's what I think we are like seeking to have. We don't want to be buried under the weight of our things because it's just at the end of the day, it's so meaningless to have all this stuff, really. Like, what do we have to show for it? We have to show like hours of cleaning each week when we could be using that time for our friends or our kids or our husband or relax for ourselves. And so I think addressing those two spots, just even noticing, again, maybe someone's listening and they're like, I have no interest in doing this. Just take note if you pull everything off your counters for a month, see how you feel, and then slowly add things back in. Just give it a month trial run and see how you feel at the end of that 30 days.
You
Let me ask a practical question. If you pull all that stuff off your counters and you find you don't need it anymore, is that stuff out of the line of sight and coming back? Like, okay, now I need, I don't use I don't own a bread machine, but let's say bread machine. Is
Mhm.
that like, okay, I can give away my bread machine because I don't make bread. And then
Mhm.
I guess there's stuff in the other category, like my KitchenAid, which I use on Thanksgiving. I want to have a KitchenAid, but I don't need it on my counter every day. Are they
Yeah.
different kind of categories?
Absolutely. I think that you kind of know. We know what we're using. We just aren't honest with ourselves. And I think
Mm,
that's the hardest thing because usually there's emotion tied up in it, or it's like, oh, I can't believe I spent the money on this and I don't use it. So I feel guilty. But time is going to pass anyways. And if we're not honest with ourselves, then we're just going to have this, again, extra weight that we don't need to carry. And I think that's, again, something that I've learned throughout my journey of minimalism or simplicity is that I just would rather be honest and address it now than to allow time to keep going and I'm just denying the realities of my life. And I have been frivolous before. Usually, if I get really stressed out, I'll notice that I have the tendency to start online. Like I go online, I add a bunch to my cart, and then I have this thought of I visualize myself in that outfit showing up somewhere, and then after that time, it's not new anymore. And it's like, "Oh, you kinda
mm,
already have a t-shirt like that too." So you were just
mm.
seeking this little feeling that you want to feel. So again, just it sounds like a lot of extra work mentally, but I just feel like it's a habit at this point. But, okay, so going back to what you said, so pulling everything off the counter of the bathroom or like your KitchenAid and things like that. Um, Expired products, I think you can just get rid of and you know what you're
Right.
using and not. But the KitchenAid, my example would be I have a bunch of stoneware, so really nice like Pyrex or stoneware dishes that I probably do only use on the holidays, but they are something that I am using in those seasonal times. But if you wanted to get really cutthroat, you could get rid of those things and then borrow them from someone. I am not
Mm.
opposed to borrowing from friends. I do it for special events. If I need a dress, I will ask my friends, like, hey, does anyone have something I can borrow? And my closet's also open to my friends. So I think just getting crafty and resourceful, again, so that you can use your money on other things that actually bring meaning to your life.
I think the correlation, because I am a chaos Muppet as opposed to Amy's like order Muppet in
Mhm.
terms of like I go to Amy's house and it feels so relaxing to me. It's like very clean and orderly. And I'm like, I want to live here, but I live in my own crazy chaos. So I do think that you have to know your starting point. Like
Mhm.
this weekend we had a warm day and I went and I cleaned out the car. Like I pulled all the chairs, I vacuumed it out and I got in this morning. I was like, oh, I just was so relaxed driving the car. I was so happy when I opened the door and remembered we'd cleaned it.
Mhm.
But I realized that that set point of a perfectly clean minivan with 3 kids is not realistic for me.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so I do think that the set point is like it's about figuring out systems, and I really like your idea of I have every time you do the laundry. This is a practice I've tried to get into every time. And I have 3 growing kids. This doesn't fit you. And
Mhm.
then I try to do it kind of once a month with the kids. Are you still wearing this? Do you still like this? Because the kids' rooms are so messy because they're pulling stuff out of drawers and 18 of the shirts they don't want to wear.
Mm.
And so I think that the putting those processes in place makes some sense to someone like me. Like, it's not really about getting to a hotel room, but it's
Yeah.
about cutting down on the constant because it is true that driving a trash-filled minivan feels stressful to me,
Mhm.
but keeping a perfectly pristine minivan doesn't feel realistic to me.
Yeah. I did this with the pantry. So oftentimes we will put systems into place that benefit us and we will put things on certain shelves or this makes sense to me. And then we come back a day or two later and it's completely destroyed. Our work is
Mm.
destroyed because we are living with other people that we never
Oh,
gave a
those
heads
other
up.
people,
so
small
it
people.
so my pantry, it doesn't look the prettiest. However, I have things on lower shelves for my 4-year-old and my 6-year-old, and it kind of gets less kid friendly as you get higher. But it's like this is where they know they can come grab this bag and put it back themselves. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. This is just easily accessible to them. And I don't know. I think when I used to do things my own way, I would just get so frustrated of having to come back and tidy it back up and tidy it back up. And that just felt like a waste of time. So it really does fit whatever your household rhythm is. I think that that's what you're going for.
Yeah, yeah, that makes
I wanted to
sense.
ask a question about because before I wrote down something you said because I think there's sort of like two things that are going head to head here.
Okay.
You were saying before like minimalism, it saves you time, it makes your life easier because you have to
Mhm.
do less cleaning. And then Margaret was just talking about like, okay, so I had to spend 2 hours cleaning out my car. Right, you had to dedicate your Saturday to getting that minivan back to one, as we like to say, and then slowly it's going to slide back downhill, and you have to do it again. So I think of minimalism as like, okay, rainy Saturday, I'm going to attack this stuff, but it's something you do when you have more time, when you have extra time, because it's going to be minimalism is
Yeah.
an extra job on top of daily survival. So at what point? Because I think you're right that it can also be something that makes your life easier, not harder,
Mhm.
which we're all about. So
Mhm.
when does that switch happen? Then it turns from like, here's another annoying thing I have to worry about to like, oh my gosh, I have an extra 2 hours on my Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's just that initial investment of time. And again, you can go as fast or as slow as possible. I think for sentimental items, you might want to go slower, but then some people like to rip off the band-aid and just get rid of it. I'm one of the second type of people. I need to just get rid of it. But I think even if the minimalists talk about this, it's called the men's game. And on day one, you get rid of one thing. Day two, you get rid of two things, then three things, then four things every day of the month. And I can't remember how many things at the end of the month you've gotten rid of, but it kind of just builds this little momentum. And that's why I think in the bathroom where you're not sentimentally attached to things, it's easier to get that little win under your belt so that you can move through your house much more, I guess, efficiently. But also, it's not going to take you a ton of time. Your bathroom's usually the smallest room in your house, too. And so it just feels like, wow, I can actually do this. And spend 15 minutes on it. Like, just chip away at it to where you're not having to spend 2 hours. Sometimes I just do that in general with cleaning. I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna deep clean because 'cause I'm not a great deep cleaner. I'm better at tidying. But sometimes I'm like, "Okay, 15 minutes deep clean, and then I'm done. And then I'm gonna take the rest of the night to myself."
But I
And
mean, like on a macro level, though, I mean,
yeah.
because you're saying like it doesn't have to take 2 hours; it can take 15 minutes. But I'm like, when do you get 15 minutes back? When do you get 2 hours back? Like,
Oh.
when does it start to change into something that you gain from instead of something you need to spend extra time on?
Well, I think again, like Margaret was saying, it depends on what level you're starting at. If your
Mm.
starting point is a super chaotic near hoarder type house, it might take you a little bit more time. But I think that again, it comes back to your personality of like, can I get rid of things in a more cutthroat way to where maybe if I do have boxes of things everywhere, I'm just like, hey, I'm going to call up the junk truck and they're going to come take it all away. And you're getting that time back right away. versus someone that does slowly go towards it. It just depends on how much I think you do have to sort through. I don't know if I can answer that on like a general idea basis.
Yeah, we're so interested in the show always. And like, don't do this because it'll make you a better person. Do this because it will make your
because it's
Tuesday morning
practical.
easier. And you know,
Oh
it's going
yeah.
to be better for you in the long run, not so you'll be a better person.
Yeah.
And I do think that that is true for minimalism. Also, it's just maybe like the horizon line's a little longer for some of us.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, let's see here. So my husband and I have been married for 12 years. I would say that conversation happens like on year 1, year 2, and we just recently moved. So you think that you get rid of things when you move, and then we moved again the second time, and I refused to bring anything into my house that I knew didn't have a home. It was like, okay, well, of
Ah,
course the dining room table goes there. Of course my clothes go in the closet. But anything that was just kind of like, what is this obscure thing? We left it in the garage and we went through it together. Like I kind of moved some boxes to one side. And then once I had gone through it, it was like, okay, I'm going to dump all of this unless you go through it. So we just kept it there as kind of like a landing zone of let's not bring it in here. And I think the minimalists also talk about this. The one guy, Ryan, I think he packed up his entire apartment and he saw what he used over 30 days and whatever he didn't, he got rid of. Again, this is a single man that he probably
yeah.
had a little bit more flexibility there, but I do like that idea if you're trying to really get rid of things.
I really like that idea, and I think that idea I mean, I know that when we move, it's like, "Okay, let's just move this box." Like, there's definitely boxes that have moved from every house, and they're just still a box. It's like,
Yeah.
"Why are we doing this?"
Mhm.
The
Should we
box
take
that comes everywhere. We're talking to Diane Boden of Minimalist Moms, and we'll be right back.
You were talking about your spouse with this, and you're
Mhm.
like, okay, we're going to do this. Let's just say, what if there's somebody sitting here right now on this
Uh-oh.
podcast episode who had a spouse that had a very different set point for what needed to be kept versus what didn't? Um, when we like, I'm thinking about like our front hall closet. It is prime real estate. I live in a city apartment. I don't have a landing zone. I don't have a car. I don't have a basement. I don't have a porch. I just have my house, and
Mhm.
so our coat closet becomes stuffed with all kinds of the broken toaster nonsense ends up in this coat closet. And we go to clean it out, and it's very hard because everything that we encounter is like, but we might need this, but and it ends up being a source of conflict that I'm like thrown out. And I have a partner who's much more that's a little bit harder. How do you
Yeah.
sort of how do you sort of come to a common ground?
Well, again, with the communal areas, you definitely need to get to like an agreement in those spaces. But I can relate to you because when we first got married, we were in 800 square feet on half a duplex. And we didn't even have that entryway coat closet. It was like randomly back in the back. And it was kind of a catch all for all of us. But as we were going through those things, I don't know, for some reason, if it's out of sight, out of mind, it is easier for me to just rationally be like, okay, we're not using it. But for like a broken toaster, well, maybe we'll get it fixed. It's like, well, why don't we get it fixed right now? Let's get it fixed or else we're never going to. And what if it's nice to think in what ifs, but I do also think over the age of like 30, we rarely like it's very rare that we're becoming that what if. We should just live in the current moment. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? Like our habits and cycles are pretty, I don't know, the brain is malleable. So that's why I'm here today to try to influence your listeners. But at the same time, I just don't want to keep living for my future self. I want to just live
Mm.
for the now. And again, if I need a new toaster or fill in the blank for the future, I often can borrow it or buy it for a similar price. But it just is taking up space that you could use now for your current self. Or you can leave it empty. A lot of our new house is empty right now because I don't really know what to do with the space and I also don't have money to furnish it. So it's just like, we're just going to leave open space and see how this evolves. But I'm thinking of my dad, who's way more sentimental than my mom, and that has been a process. But I think what's interesting, you guys should look into Swedish death cleaning, and it's the idea from this woman, Margarita Munson. I don't know if I pronounced her name right, but she talks about how in Sweden they really are currently, or they are regularly going through assessing what they have, so that the future generation doesn't have to navigate that while in grief and while in mourning. It's like, I'm going to get rid of this stuff, set in these systems into place with what I want, like handed down, what can be disposed of, and just really thinking about these things. And I think a lot of people don't want to think about their mortality. That's a really hard thing to do. But for my dad, going back to that, when my aunt died, he was going through all of her stuff and he realized, oh my gosh, I don't want to leave all this stuff for you guys. So they're actually downsizing. This was a pivotal moment for him where he's like, I'm in my early 70s. I'm healthy. I want to do this now before I get sick and I can't anymore, or I leave it for you guys. So I think also just thinking about your kids and what you want to leave for them can be a motivator.
I wonder, because it's interesting about getting other people on board, because we talk a lot about how garbage starts at your front door, right? That like the
Yeah.
things that come into your house are, whether you're taking it from like an environmental perspective or a minimalist perspective, it's just the second it crosses your threshold, it's on a countdown to becoming garbage. It's just, I mean, maybe there are some pieces, I have my mother's china. I mean, maybe there's some pieces that you're going to hand down through the ages, but they're so limited.
Mhm.
And I think we hear from a lot of our listeners about grandma or grandpa or mom-in-law or dad-in-law who arrives to every visit with armloads of stuffed animals and look what I found you at the airport and I love Sweden t-shirt that we bought on our trip. Like, what is our role in terms of controlling what comes into our house from other people? Do we have a choice over that or do we just say, all right, that's gonna go. That's gonna get immediately passed along.
I think that we always want to come back to the relationship we have with people,
Mhm.
prioritizing relationship over things. But at the same time, usually when you give a gift, that moment of connection is what you're looking for. Um, you find joy in that moment between two people as opposed to the tangible item. And so for me, once I've gifted something to someone, they can do whatever they want with it. Obviously, this is a
Mm,
minimalist person talking. So
right.
I understand that not everyone feels this way. And also, gift giving is a love language. But at the same time, as adults, to me, you should be able to manage those emotions. So I'm thinking about like my mother-in-law. That is a hard relationship to manage when it comes to things because she is always so generous. But we've had to kind of get to the point of if this is something that we don't use and need, then I'm not going to keep it. And my husband has had to have conversations because again, he's closer to her. But I think you just have to navigate who is this an in-law or is this my family member? And then we would just want to navigate it in the best way to preserve the relationship, but also be honest and also let people know that you're trying to create memories over things. Hey, maybe you can give them a list of experiences you want them to go take your kids to such and such place, the trampoline park, the movie. Like you'd rather have that than a new, what were we talking about? Cars, these battery operated cars that die. Like if we can try and get that through people's heads, I think that that has been really helpful in my own life. But I know it's also can be a generational thing where people don't understand.
What about when it's your own stuff? Like, do you know the old George Carlin joke about other people's stuff is junk, but your junk is stuff? And then that's the
Oh,
difference. Um, so I'm thinking about like, I can be very unsentimental about
Gimlet-eyed
decluttering.
towards
Right.
your spouse's
Right.
stuff,
I
right.
mean, I remember back in the day, my husband and I weren't even married yet. And like, you don't need 32 t-shirts from your frat parties from college. Like, keep three. Like
yeah.
there's only 30 days in a month and you have 45 t-shirts in this like you have to get rid of some of them. But of course, if that eye were turned towards my like lipsticks I'll never use again, right? Then the tables are turned. So how do you make sure that maybe this isn't a problem for you, but how do we explore our own blind spots over whether we might be contributing to the clutter with
Yeah,
what
that's a
we
good
think is very
question.
important?
No, my husband tells me I do this. So I, I definitely do this. But I will also say it's been really helpful to me to have visual boundaries of, okay, well, if I have sentimental items, I have this it's a pretty big box from the Container Store and I have one for each of my kids, my husband and myself. And any sentimental item goes in there that I want to keep. And again, maybe not every minimalist wants to do that, but this is the way that I practice it. And that's my box of this is special to me. This is letters from my grandma. These are medals that I won in races. This is my well, I threw my daughter's like blanket that she came home from the hospital in hers. And she'll go through these things and see what's special to her once she's out of my house. But I think that's been helpful to me to say, like, you can fill this box, but then once it's full, you need to kind of go back through and don't say that everything's your favorite because then nothing's your favorite, I guess is what I try to keep in mind. And then with clothes, that's, I think, an area that I have a hard time decluttering because I love clothes so much. So I just don't buy new hangers. And my hangers are what I have in my closet. And then if I want something new, I usually won't buy anything new unless I sell something and make money back or until I've waited for a period of time. Usually I try and wait 2 to 4 weeks and then I'll pull the trigger. But oftentimes, like I said at the beginning, I'm trying to fill some type of emotion with buying a new outfit that I don't really need because I wear the same things. That's another
Mhm.
thing of being rational with myself. I am constantly wearing like a uniform of sorts. And it's like, okay, why do I need to keep buying these new things? It just makes me feel good. And it's okay to feel good. And it's okay to spend frivolously from time to time. But I just want to try and stay within these boundaries as much as possible because that's that acquisition cycle that we're trying to break.
So how do we know my kids are now 12, 14, 15. And, there's some lingering items. Like, do you have a system for as kids move through phases of the kind of things we're playing with?
Hmm.
When do we know it's time to say, like, okay, let's transfer over from the remote control cars to whatever's next?
Hmm.
And do you have a guideline around how you think about those kind of decisions? I know you talked about the bin that, like, if it hasn't been asked for a month, I like
Hmm.
that system a lot.
Hmm.
But is there more like, okay, we're kind of doing more video games we can get rid of? I don't know. Not video games because we want them to be outside, but we're riding bikes more than we're doing magnetiles.
Sure, sure. One thing that's been helpful to me because I do think I've had a sentimental attachment with even my third child because I know that I'm not having any more kids.
Mm,
Um, so I have gifted those items to friends that are in my circle, like in the little groups that I'm in, and just so that I can see that it has a second life. And it's kind of like I don't want to say it's on loan, but if I ever needed that back, I'm sure my friend would give it back. But it kind of just helps like
mhm.
detach a little bit more because I can see it have a second life. So it's not necessarily over. Because I think that's one of the things that gets us, we're stunted in not moving through the things because we're saying goodbye to that season of life. And I think that's really hard too.
That's right.
So,
It means admitting something if you give
yeah.
away the
Mhm.
Legos, right?
Yeah, and so also I think that people that are trying to live a more sustainable life will have probably more environmentally friendly ways to get rid of things. Sometimes I will try my hardest to do that. Other times it's just like I need this gone. This is taking up too much space. I'm thinking of you, Amy, and like I'm trying to think of where you could have a bin of things that your little limbo box of where it could be.
Right,
Maybe it's in that front closet. Maybe you need to
right.
declutter the front closet so that that's where your box can be on the bottom floor.
I think it is the limbo box. I think my friend calls it that, right?
It
It has
is
become
the
that, and now
limbo
we need to go
box.
through it. And that won't be fun.
And say limbo is over for you,
Mhm.
broken toaster. You're going. Diane, we're going to link, of course, to your podcast, Minimalist Moms. Tell our audience where else they can find you and your work.
Yes. So my podcast, as you said, is Minimalist Moms podcast, available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. I have a book of the same title. It's more for beginners, but they're little mantras that you can just ruminate on throughout your week, like start today or just for a season. But those are just short little snippets that you can read. And then I will announce it because it'll hold me accountable. I'm hoping to start a new podcast here in the next couple of months called Clear Intentions. And again, as I said at the beginning, I have been practicing a minimalist way of life for so long now that I feel like my house is pretty much how I want it. But now I have the work to do on my mind and what I'm saying yes to. And so that podcast is going to be more practical tips on how to have clear direction for your life. So you heard it here first.
Wow, breaking news on the What Fresh Hell
Mhm.
podcast. We love to see it.
Yeah.
Diane, this was a great conversation. Amy and I are going to work this
That's
afternoon. I
right.
can feel
Yeah.
it
Watch out, front
already in my
closet.
bones. Thanks so much for talking to us.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Diane.